if you see the DNA methylation, okay, so the importance of DNA methylation can be studied at 3 levels. One is at the biochemical level, second is at the molecular level, and the other is at the organism level. So at the biochemical level, so because of the methylation, okay, so there is a change in the van der Waal radius. So every nucleotide in DNA occupies certain space. So the moment you alter this DNA or you add something, so what happens is that the local structure or the occupancy gets changed. So that leads to some kind of problem. And so what happens? There is a defect in the van der Waals radius that leads to altered DNA structure, then DNA bending, then the affinity towards the DNA binding proteins. So there are many proteins, for example transcription factors, they are DNA binding in nature. So protein can bind to proteins, proteins can bind to RNA, proteins can bind to proteins, okay, that is how they work. So protein are the workhorse, okay, this how they work by protein protein interaction, protein DNA interaction as well as protein RNA interaction. Because of the addition of a methyl group, so they can alter this van der Waal radius. Van der Waal radius means occupancy of these nucleotides in the DNA. So that leads to altered DNA structure. There will be a bending which can be introduced. This leads to the defect in the DNA protein interaction. That leads to altered gene expression. So at the molecular level, so what happens is that, which we already discussed, there is a, this can lead to chromatin compaction, the changes in the gene expression, changes in the RNA metabolism, changes in the DNA replication, changes in the transposable element movement, all these things can be induced at the molecular level. So together, so what happens is that they can have an impact on the imprinting, development, then cellular pluripotency, then proliferation, differentiation, organogenesis. You take any property of a cell, all will be affected by the simple addition of a methyl group to the fifth position of the cytosine. So any doubt so far, guys? Any doubt? Okay. So there are two types of changes in the methylation. Remember, one is called as hypermethylation, second one is hypomethylation. So hypermethylation refers to you have a DNA, previously there was no methylation, but because of the hyperactivity of DNA methyltransferases, methyl groups are being added. So that's why we call it as hypermethylation. Hypomethylation refers to loss of methylation. So that region had methylation, but because of the enzyme activity, DNA methyltransferase activity, that region lost the methylation. So oncogenes generally they are hypermethylated and they loses methylation during cancer. Tumor suppressor genes generally they are hypomethylated or unmethylated and they gain methylation, which we call it as hypermethylated, leading to transcriptional silencing. Okay, this much clear, right? And DNA methylation is a process by which in which a methyl group is added to the fifth position of the cytosine by a group of enzymes called as DNA methyltransferase. So I'll just skip this slide, it is not required. I'll just skip these two slides, not required. So now, so I told so many things, methylation past 15 minutes, right? So why this methylation is important? Methylation, see if you see cancer, okay, for example, if it reaches advanced stage, literally there is no cure, okay, then people when we say advanced stage means, so you have stage 4, there is a different way people classify, and then there is something called as metastasis, then there is literally no cure, okay. But what we do is palliative care, or we maintain, we keep the patient in a good health till they survive. That is what we call it as something called as palliative care. So I don't want to go into the details of that. So, but if you detect these cancers very early, remember this, there is a good chance of cure. Okay. For example, in cervical cancer, we have a very high chance. For example, in case of oral cancer, you have a very high chance of patient can survive very long if it is detected early. But if it is detected at late stage, so there is a problem. Okay. So now So with the help of methylation, what we can do is we can use it for variety of clinical applications. Okay. For example, so if you see any cancer, so the cancer, many of the cancer progresses via well defined progression model. So what you mean by a progression model? We have a normal cell, okay, here you can see, then it becomes a pre-neoplastic cell, then it becomes a tumor cell, then it becomes a local cancer, and from there it starts spreading, okay. So this is how it goes. Now why a normal cell become a pre-neoplastic, then it becomes tumor cell, then it becomes a local tumor, and then it becomes metastasis? Because lot of molecular changes which happens inside our cell. So if you identify these changes at very early, we can use it as an early diagnostic marker. So that, so a patient or a person who is having cancer, or he has a high chance of getting developed into a cancer, can undergo lot of screening. Okay, for example, you know that Down syndrome. Now we have a prenatal diagnostic test. Ultrasound can be used, right? So there is a triple screening. Then karyotyping can be done. So there are many ways you can screen these genetic disorders. So prenatal screenings are there. So like that, so if you develop the molecular changes which are responsible for converting a normal cell into a cancer cell, so you can ask the people to undergo rigorous screening, so that you are sure that you are free from cancer. Okay, so that is the idea. So lot of people use this DNA methylation or epigenetic information to develop early diagnostic markers. In addition to that, what people are also trying to do is, in the traditional way of cancer treatment, what they do is either they give chemotherapy or radiotherapy or combination therapy. Okay, and the clinicians, based on their expertise or based on their experience, so they decide what dose to be given, how the dose to be given, whether you will give one dose or fractionated dose. I am not going to the details of that. So that's the way they used to do. So you must have seen many cancer patients losing the hair, then edema in the skin. So maybe you must have seen so these complications. But if you know, and it doesn't mean that they will show a good response to the treatment. Okay, some people show poor response and they die, and they have to take this all this pain and many things. Okay, so I don't want to go into the details of that. But if you understand what is the molecular change, then we can prescribe specific drugs so that they don't show any of these symptoms. Okay, without any symptoms, the treatment can be regimed, so that so you have a very good clinical outcome. So for all this purpose, so what we need is, we need molecular markers. So for one of the molecular markers, what people do is use this methylation profile. Okay, so we also developed some this one, which I will come to that in the subsequent slide. So this I already told. So now coming to the uh, HPV, human papillomavirus. So this is a CMV for virus. So I'll restrict my talk how viruses can cause cancer, and how they control the complete cellular machinery to their benefit, and in turn how a normal cells become converted into a cancer cell. Okay, I will show some published data by us, some published data by others, and what we are doing at Manipal. Okay, so if you see HPV, human papillomavirus, it belongs to a uh, Papaver family, and it's a very small virus. I will show you the genome structure. So what people have shown is that initially, Sir Gerald R. Hussein, so he got the Nobel Prize for discovering HPV as a causative organism for cervical cancer. Okay, so initially people thought that HPV is the cause of cervical cancer. Now what people are doing is that, in addition to the cervical cancer, there are lot of other cancers can be caused by this HPV, including head and neck cancer, then oropharyngeal cancer, vaginal cancer, vulvar cancer, anal cancer, penile cancer. Like that, there are series of uh, cancers which are caused by HPV. Okay, so in HPV, so it's a more than 200 types of HPVs people have identified by now, and they are classified into two important categories. They are called as a high risk HPV and low risk HPV. What are the high risk HPV? High risk HPVs are those human papillomavirus which can cause cancer. So other viruses, HPV types which doesn't cause cancer, they are put under the term low risk HPVs. Okay. Then there are another group of viruses whose function yet to be characterized. They are called as intermediate type of HPV. Okay. So based on the cancer causing ability, human papillomavirus are classified into three categories. One is high risk virus, second one is low risk virus, and the other one is intermediate type, where it is still we are not clear whether they can cause cancer, but they are strongly found associated with cancer. Whether they are the cause or they are just a causal association, people had to discover. So among the HPV types, HPV, there are about 13 HPV types which are classified as a high risk HPVs. Okay, so there, so if you are infected with such type of viruses, you are likely to get, or you have a higher chance of getting, or you are at a higher risk of developing cervical cancer or other types of cancers. Okay. So the HPV virus, the viruses which the strains or types which are associated with the cancer include 16, 18, 15, and so these are the different types of the strains. Like this, we have about 200 strains. Okay, so all are broadly classified into three categories. So what are the three categories? Come on, guys. What are the three categories? High risk, low risk, and intermediate risk. So now the question is, how do we get HPV? Okay. So the one of the major this one for HPV infection is sexual activity. Okay. So because of the sexual activity, so HPV is present as a, it's present in everybody's body. Okay, and it is cleared because of our immunity. Sometimes when our immunity is weak, so what happens is they have a chance of entering inside our cell, or enter inside our cell means they can get inside our DNA, and then they start creating the problem. So the one of the way it enters into our body is sexual activity. So you have a HPV infection. So which this I already told what are the HPV infection. So about 70 to 70% of the HPV which enters in our body, they are cleared, but rest of them, so they cause the trouble. Okay. So now what happens is that if they are not cleared, they have a chance of entering inside our DNA. The HPV DNA can get integrated into our DNA. Okay, and then they can start producing the oncogenic protein which takes control over our this signal, various signaling mechanisms. Okay, I will tell you how it happens. So this is the organization of the HPV genome. So if you see this HPV, so this is the structure of a HPV 16 DNA. So if you see the HPV DNA, so we have two types of proteins in HPV. Okay, it is called as late protein and early protein. Okay, E1, E2, E4, E5, E6, E7 are the early proteins, and L1 and L2 are the late proteins. And the human HPV is approximately 8 kb in size. Okay, what is the size of the human HPV? 8 kilobases. So kilo kb. So that's how we measure the size of the DNA. Like how we measure the length in kilometers or centimeter, millimeter. So the size of the DNA is measured in base pairs. Okay, it is having a 8,000 base pairs. Most of the HPV virus, they have 8,000 base. Okay. So, so this is, so the HPV DNA genome is circular in nature. They are circle. The problem comes, so if in a circular form, they are basically episomal in our cell. Episomal means they don't bind to the DNA. So like a mitochondrial DNA and all, so they are also present inside our cell. Okay, but because of the homologous recombination kind of event, because HPV DNA also shares many sequences, okay, which are similar to the human DNA. So there they can have a integration, which we call it as integration site. Okay. So we have many oncogenic virus sequences which are present in our DNA, transposable element sequences, which came from the viruses or bacteria. So we have something called as horizontal gene transfer, vertical gene transfer. So I am not going to the details of that. So there are many events with the help of which this HPV DNA can get integrated into the host DNA. When it gets integrated into the host DNA, that's where it starts creating a problem. So it doesn't mean that the moment it gets integrated into the DNA, so you get cancer. It takes nearly 15 to 20 years for first infection to develop into a cancer. So in order for during this 15 to 20 years, what it does is it changes our epigenome and our DNA. Thereby, it takes a complete control of our cell. Okay, that's how it makes the cell to proliferate. Okay, you are getting my point, no? So now this is the structure of the HPV DNA upon integration. Okay, so during integration, some of the regions in the HPV DNA, such as E2, it is lost and then it gets integrated. Okay, there are many hypotheses people have proposed, so we don't want to go into the details of that. You remember that the HPV can have two forms in the host cell. It can be an integrated form or the episomal form. Okay, and HPV testing, we call it as something called as a triage testing. So it is used for uh, during cervical cancer screening. People also use this as a one of the tests. Okay, how many of you have heard about HPV vaccines? Come on, ladies, you should be knowing this. HPV, the women of the reproductive age, now you get a vaccine. So if time is there, I will show the slide because most of the audience are ladies. So I will show some of the slides if it is, because it is very important. So cervical cancer is the one of the leading cause of cancer related death in India. Okay, so as a ladies, you should know aware of some of these facts. So what are the tests which are available for this one screening? So one of the tests which people use is called as a pap testing. So what the clinicians do is they take a pap, something called as a pap smear. So and then they observe under they put some stains and then they observe under the microscope for a defective cervical cells. So a normal healthy cervix cells have a different morphology and a defective cell has a different morphology. Based on that, they say whether you have any cervical problem. Okay, so I will, if time permits, I will talk to you that. And there is a, please read about this pap testing, what are the tests which are available for cervical cancer, then HPV vaccine. Okay, so it is very very important, so you should be aware of what are the symptoms of if you have a cervical infection or cervical cancer. So what are the infection which you can feel, so that is also you should be aware of it, so that you can undergo a simple test. Okay, which doesn't cost much. Some of the hospital charge 500 rupees, some of the hospital charge 100 rupees. 100 rupees is not a this one, or 500 rupees is not a big charge. So it is in western countries it is covered under insurance. So once in 6 months or once in a year, so they what is mandatorily they go for a pap screening. That's how in well developed countries the cervical cancer incidence is drastically brought down. Now we have vaccines which are currently available, with the help of which, so again some of the countries still it is brought down. So basically it is a cancer which is curable, like oral cancer. Okay, because cervix it is very easy for examination. So if you undergo regular this one screening, then it is you can keep away from this cancer. Okay, so now, so we said there is an integration. So if there is an integration, so what happens, how the normal cell gets converted into cancer cell? So if you see the HPV DNA, there are two proteins, early protein and late protein. Among the early protein, there are two important oncogenic proteins. Okay, there are about six early proteins. Okay, out of which two are very critical, E6 and E7. E6, E refers to early, L refers to late. E6 and E7. Okay. So what they do? So they do, so E6 and E7, they target important tumor suppressor genes. So for example, you know that P53 gene, you must have heard about P53 gene, right? Yes or no? Your plus 2 you must have heard. Huh? P53 gene. Okay, or retinoblastoma gene. Okay. So what this protein do is they produces some these viruses, they produce some proteins which we call it as oncoproteins. So what they do is they go and bind to some of the important genes, and then they start down regulating those genes, or they start degrading such genes. So as a result of which what happens is that there will be proliferation of the cell. See, you have a DNA, okay, and DNA, if it is exposed to some kind of chemicals or some agent, so when we do the cell undergo a lot of metabolism, so what happens is lot of reactive oxygen species are being produced. So these reactive oxygen species can damage DNA, they are mutagenic agents, okay, and sometimes we take some food, so the taste makers, Ajinomoto, okay, so it can induce DNA damage, okay. Similarly, like that, there are many chemicals are there. You take pizza. How many of you eat pizza? Those tasting powders, okay, they put lot of harmful chemicals. Similarly, that ice gola. How many of you take ice gola? You know, right? So, how many of you take? Okay, if you don't take, then that is fine. So they put some color, no? They are all banned chemicals. Okay, one of the chemical what they put for red color is acridine orange, which is a mutagenic agent, and once if it enters into your cell, it cannot be cleared for 72 years. Okay, that is the shelf life of the half life of the your acridine orange. Okay, so don't take such bad food. So they can all have an impact. Okay, they can all induce mutations in your DNA. So when there is a mutation, so what happens is that the normal control is lost. That is what being shown here. So you have these oncoproteins, they target some of the important tumor suppressor genes, they degrade them so that the oncogenic genes can get activated. So you have HPV, it produces E6 and E7 oncoproteins, and they can target variety of epigenetic machinery. I said epigenetics is done because of the variety of the enzymes, right? We have DNA methyl transferases, we have histone modifying enzymes. So all these enzymes whose expression can be either upregulated or it can be downregulated because of the oncogenic proteins which are produced by E6 and E7. Okay, so that in turn alters the this nucleosome positioning, and thereby it can say whether a tumor suppressor gene has to be down regulated or an oncogene has to be upregulated. You understood, no? How does HPV work? Now you tell me. HPV produces two important oncoproteins, E6 and E7. So what this E6 and E7 does? They target the epigenetic machinery and leading to establishment of a oncogenic epigenome, where the oncogenes gets activated, tumor suppressor gene gets downregulated. That's how they promote carcinogenesis. You got the point, right? Yeah. I'll just skip this, not required. So now coming to the HPV vaccines. So currently there are few companies which market HPV vaccine. So they say quadrivalent, divalent based on the number of strains they protect. So for example, so 80% of the cervical cancer is because of HPV 16 and 18. So most of these what is that HPV vaccine manufacturing companies, they produce vaccine against HPV 16 and 18. The next comes HPV 6 and 11. They induce genital wart kind of thing, warts, skin wart and all. Okay, so people have also developed vaccines against that. So you have vaccines against HPV 16, 18, 11 and 6. So if you take those vaccines, you get protected against HPV infection. But when you take these vaccines, it has to be before you attain your reproductive age. So once you have HPV infection being well established in your body, so taking vaccine, how effective we don't know. But if you before you get infected with this virus, means before the reproductive age or before the sexual activity, so you get good protection. Okay, so that's what the most of the studies they say. So by taking HPV vaccine, so what are the cancers we can get protected? We have a mouth cancer, throat cancer, cervical cancer, vaginal cancer, vulvar cancer, anal cancer, penile cancer. So all these things can be, we can get protected. Okay. So both males and females of the reproductive age, they are recommended to take these vaccines. Okay. Because it is sometimes what happens, the male is the partner who contributes this virus to the female and vice versa. Okay. So female can also contribute this virus to the male. So both of them get, should take the vaccine. I'll just skip this, not required. I'll just skip this slide. So now coming to how we can detect the HPV. So now we said HPV is a oncogenic virus and it can do lot of trouble to us. So now how to detect? So there are many molecular tools which are available to detect the HPV. So what are the tools? The first one is nucleic acid based hybridization assays, then signal modification assays, then nucleic acid amplification assays. So these are the different techniques which are available. At Manipal, so we do this test. Okay. So what is nucleic acid amplification assay? So what we do is we take either a punch biopsy of the cervical cells or we take a cervical smear, and then what we do is we isolate the DNA. When we isolate the DNA, human DNA, along with human DNA, you also get HPV DNA. Then what we do? We do something called as PCR. You have heard about PCR, right? Polymerase chain reaction. So you just do PCR and run it on a gel, agarose gel. So if the person is infected with HPV, so you should get a band. Amplification you should get. If person is not infected, you will not get that band. Now we said there are more than 100 varieties of HPV types. How to identify HPV types? Whether if it is a low risk, it's okay. If it is high risk, then it's a problem. How to detect high risk or low risk? Then what we do something called as either gene specific PCR. We know that HPV 16, HPV 18, HPV 11, HPV 6, different strains. Their sequences are different. Okay. So if you design a primer for to amplify only those strains, and then you do PCR, we can identify those specific strains. Or alternatively, what you can do also is you do a PCR and then you do something called as sequencing. Okay, when you do sequencing, then there are some tools are available with which we can compare and we can say whether the infected strain is HPV 16, 18 or whatever it is. You got the point, no? So in nucleic acid based this one, what we do is amplification technology. We isolate DNA, we amplify the HPV DNA by a variety of methods and we detect it. So signal amplification assay, what we have is we have some sequences which we call it as probe, which is specific to the HPV genome. Then we take the sample and then we do a something called as hybridization. So we don't have to worry about this, but at this point of time you understand that there are signal amplification assays which are available. Then nucleic acid hybridization assays such as southern blot, in situ hybridization, dot plot. So you can take a pap smear, then you can do a fish kind of experiment. Okay. So then you can detect, which we call it as in situ hybridization. Okay. So like this, there are variety of methods which are available which target the nucleic acid. Either you do amplify the HPV genome or you capture the signal whether HPV genome is present or absent using some modified method. And these are all being used for the diagnosis of HPV. So these are used for the uh, identification of the HPV, classification of the HPV. So coming to the diagnostic, so many of these techniques are in fact people are using for diagnosis. Any doubt, guys? Any doubt? So as a part of our cervical cancer research, okay, what we did is we looked into the prevalence of HPV in cervical cancer. Okay, so we did lot of samples, we screened, and what we identified was 80% of the samples they were found to be HPV positive, remaining 20% were HPV negative. And people were not ready to believe this data, so we were submitting to different journals. Journal after we submitted, it came back, we submitted, it came back, like that many journals it went, and finally we are able to publish. These people, this journal it took, and now after we publish this data, lot of now people are openly publishing that cervical cancer samples can be HPV negative. This is all because of that man who got the Nobel Prize, okay, who said that cervical cancer is because of HPV. In fact, now the current research shows that yes, it is important. It is one of the important risk factors, but it is not the sole risk factor for cervical cancer. Okay, so now lot of people they are quoting our paper. So in our method, what we did is we used a nested PCR and sequencing based approach, and what we identified was about 14 different types of HPVs in cervical cancer samples. Okay, so what are these this one? So this is a histopathological analysis of the this one. We found approximately 82%, 82.5% samples as found to be HPV positive, and then we also found that in these are the pre-malignant stages, LS, IL and HSIL, low grade squamous intraepithelial lesion and high grade squamous intraepithelial lesion. They also have a very high frequency of HPV infection, and in non-malignant condition we identified lesser percentage of HPV infection. So these are all non-malignant. Okay, they are not normal, not completely normal, but they have some kind of infection. But in that also, if you see, lot of large proportion of samples they have a HPV infection. And then what we did is we did lot of bioinformatic analysis to identify what is the phylogenetic relationship, so which family they belong to. So I don't want to go into the details of that. So these are the different ways people represent. So very importantly, what we identified is that we identified approximately 11 to 12 new strains of HPV, so which was not part of any of the HPV strains. So this we have deposited in the database, and we are currently working on this, characterizing the complete genome of this HPV. So what are the other this is only a part of the HPV sequence. So we wanted to build the complete this one, and all these things were actually isolated from human samples. So that's why this could be an important strain which can cause the cervical cancer. Another area we worked was on HIV area. So what we did is we screened lot of what are the opportunistic pathogenic viruses which are found in the HIV infected women. So again, the sample was taken from the cervix region and it was profiled by PCR and sequence. And again, what we found was that HPV infection was uh, about 57.7%, and oncogenic HPV type was found to be in 38.5% of the cases. It was found to be HPV 16, and together with the HPV 16 and 18, so there were about 73.3% of the cases. So they are all high risk. This okay. So what it tells is that so in HIV infected cases, so they also tend to get infected with other opportunistic microorganisms. Among these microorganisms, most of them are cancer causing viruses. We also identified high risk. I showed only HPV data here. So we also identified high risk of high level of CMV and HSV infection as well. Okay. So this is the demographic data, so not required. And again in oral cancer also we have done some study where we found that 55% of the cases of oral cancer samples were HPV positive, and that too we did this analysis from the region of tongue. So if you see the oral cavity, so the oral cancer, so they show that they say that the tongue cancer, then floor of the mouth, then cheek cancer, so then buccal cavity. So there are different ways based on the site of sampling. Okay, they classify this cancer, and most of the cancer based on the site they have a different prognostic significance. So we screened this one, what is the tribal population as well as normal healthy individuals. So we screened about 1140 and 1100 patients, okay. Samples from tribal and general population in and around Udupi was screened for many of the viruses, oncogenic viruses such as HPV, EBV and CMV, HSV, all these uh, viruses by very high sensitive method. And then we identified among the tribal populations we screened, tribal populations had a very high prevalence of HPV. Now coming to, so this is about the HPV. So you understood now what HPV can do. So HPV can, upon infection and getting integrated into our genome, it can do take control of your lot of cell signaling pathways and control the cell and make the cell to proliferate, okay, and acquire defect and proliferate, and they can make a normal cell get converted into a tumor cell. Now what we did is, when we did that HPV data is a part of this study, and what we did is we started doing understanding. So what are the changes, okay, the changes in DNA which can be used as a early diagnostic marker for cervical cancer. Okay, that is what we did. And since our lab was working on uh, this one, what is that, DNA methylation? So we looked into what are the DNA methylation regulated genes which can be used for early diagnosis of cervical cancer. So these are the number of samples which we have done. So, and what we did is we looked into the DNA methylation level. So you don't worry about those terminologies. So what we showed is that, so this is the DNA methylation level in normal sample, and this is the DNA methylation in tumor sample. So basically in normal sample, when compared with the normal sample, in tumor samples, we see lot of DNA methylation level as a is down. So profiling for a DNA methylation, global methylation. So what we can do is, you can identify a tumor samples with approximately 94% sensitivity and specificity. What do you mean by sensitivity and specificity? If you have a marker, to say a marker as a good marker or bad marker, we use something called as sensitivity and specificity analysis. How sensitive a marker, what is the false positive rate and what is the false negative rate. If a tumor is tumor, how good your marker says it is a tumor, and how bad your tumor says it is a normal sample. You understood, no? How good you can classify, identify that sample as a tumor. That is what sensitivity, specificity tells. So by undergoing a global methylation profiling, so we can distinguish a normal cell with the tumor cells with more than 90% sensitivity, 94% sensitivity and specificity. So the current existing screening methods for cervical cancer has lot of advantages as well as disadvantages. For example, Pap test, that has the advantage as well as disadvantage. The other molecular markers, again they have advantage or disadvantage with respect to the sensitivity and specificity. So what we showed is that with large number of samples, so our technique is more sensitive and specific than the existing screening methodology. Okay. Based on this, we have submitted this for a funding from a government funding agency called as BIRAC, and now they have funded us to develop a marker for cervical cancer. So we are almost done. By the next year, we are trying to launch this data in the form of a product to screen for cervical cancer. Okay. So again, this I'll just skip, not required for your this one. So what we did by doing this kind of screening is, we identify the the level of changes of level of DNA methylation in normal sample as well as pre-malignant samples as well as tumor samples. Okay, you don't worry about the this picture. So what it tells is that the genes what we have screened, how is the methylation pattern is different from one sample to the other. So you can see here, this entire line is nothing but a normal sample or one sample. This is the second sample, this is the third sample. Like that, you have series of samples which are being represented, and the color represents the extent of methylation. So if you see here, so these blocks are normal samples. Okay, these are all tumor samples. So more towards red indicates that they are more methylated. Okay. So now if you use this kind of more methylated regions and you develop as a diagnostic test, you can actually use it as a screening tool. And these samples, okay, they are all mostly unmethylated in normal samples, but in pre-malignant and malignant samples, they are highly methylated. Means they start gaining methylation. So by developing a simple test, so you will be able to detect cervical. Okay. So based on a series of screening, So what we have identified is that we have developed a 11 gene panel, okay, which showed more than 90% sensitivity to distinguish a normal from a pre-malignant sample and normal from a tumor sample. Okay. Any doubt so far? Okay. I know you will say no. So coming to, so we said that lot of genes they are altered, right? So now what is the functional significance? So if a gene is altered, how it contributes to cancer? So for that, what we did is we developed lot of model systems. So we use something called as mouse models to investigate this. We use something called as cell lines to investigate this. So all these things, model systems are being used. Okay. Let me tell you how to use these model systems. Okay. Don't get confused with this diagram. So how many of you have heard about karyotyping? Many of you have heard about karyotyping, right? Karyotyping is nothing but the arrangement of chromosomes based on the size and banding pattern. Okay, that has a very important implication in the field of cytogenetics to detect the chromosomal abnormality. So in molecular biology, the karyotyping is shown here like this. So these are nothing but the different chromosomes, and these are the way we represent the changes in the genes. Okay, that is what it means. So one of the gene which we identified called as DOCK2B, which is nothing but the double C2 like domain beta, and so we wanted to know, so because what we identified is that, so it gives more than 90% sensitivity and sensitivity and specificity to detect a normal from pre-malignant and from pre-malignant from tumor. If this gene is hypermethylated, there is a likely that 90% of the times a normal cell gets converted into pre-malignant, from pre-malignant it gets progressed into tumor. So it's a very important gene. Okay. So now we wanted to understand how this gene does. Okay. So this is the information about the gene. Okay. We don't worry about the information of the gene. So this gene is involved in neurotransmitter release. It is very important. It's a marker for diabetes. If this gene is in diabetic people, this gene is actually it is down regulated, and this gene is very important for insulin stimulated glucose uptake and glucose stimulated insulin release. That is what is defect in diabetes. So there is a defect, insulin dependent glucose uptake and glucose stimulated insulin secretion doesn't happen, okay, in a simple term. So one of the gene which is responsible for that is DOCK2B, and it is now considered as an important marker for diabetes, and soon this marker will come into market for diabetes screening. Okay, so our interest was to understand so how the uh, this gene contributes to cervical cancer. So what we did is we looked into different cancers. Okay, so this is a cancer sample and this is a normal sample. And if you see here, so in the brain, this in brain sample tumor, it is completely down regulated. Whereas in a normal brain, it is completely getting expressed. Similarly, in breast cancer, you can see here, this gene is expressing. But in breast cancer sample, sorry, this is a normal person. So this image, and this is a tumor. So in breast cancer also, it is completely down regulated. So, and in cervical cancer also, this gene is down regulated. So based on this, we propose that this is a very important tumor suppressor gene, and if this gene is down regulated in a based on a tissue specific condition, it can contribute to a variety of cancer. Now we did lot of survival analysis. So what we identified based on the survival analysis is that, so although there is not much significant difference in the survival based on whether the patient, if the gene is getting expressed, whether the patient will survive longer or less. So we did not identify such this one, but we what we identified is that, so if the gene is getting elevated, so the survival, or in a upregulated condition, the survival of the patient is longer. So you can see here this red color. So this is called as a Kaplan-Meier plot. This is used for predicting the, or to graphically represent a survival of the patient. So you can see here, so in a low expressing condition, they die faster as opposed to higher expressing condition. So this is the overall survival and this is a recurrence free survival. So now I wanted to understand what is the mechanism. So how to understand the mechanism? So for that what we do is we develop something called as cloning. So we take the cDNA of this gene, we clone in some kind of expression vector, and then we transfect into some of the cell lines. Okay, and then we start investigating the function. We use lot of gene delivery. Okay, so what we did is that, so you can see here. So this is control refers to the uh, this gene is not getting expressed, and doc to be refers to where we have artificially delivered this gene. So when we artificially delivered this gene, you can see the number of cells. You can see here. No, I will tell you how to interpret this data. So more the number of cells and the bigger the colony. So means it shows that tumor is growing. Okay, but lesser the number of cells and lesser the size of colony. So that tumor is getting, it is not a tumor promoter. Okay, now if you see here, so when this gene is getting expressed, the number of colonies are lesser compared to this. You agree with me, right? And the size of the colony is also less. So that indicates that the same cells, in the absence of the gene, the cells proliferate faster, it grows faster, then the size of the colony is also bigger as opposed to the same set of cells which receiving the gene. So we for this we use two cervical cancer cell lines, namely SIHA and HeLa. Cell lines are nothing but these are the cells which are isolated from the cancer patient, which are being used for variety of functional investigations to understand the function of the gene. Okay. Now we did lot of microscopy to understand where this gene goes. So you can see here, so see this slide. Okay. So in the presence of my gene, okay, the gene is localized to the plasma membrane. So in the absence of the gene is not present in the plasma membrane. So so if you see the cancer cell, when it comes to the metastasis, so there is a loss of cell to cell adhesion. Okay. So one of the property or hallmarks of cancer is loss of cell to cell adhesion. So when the cells doesn't attach with each other, it gives a flexibility of cells to move from one place to the other. It can move. You agree with me, right? So when the cell want to metastasize, so what they do is they lose the cell to cell interaction. The majority of the cells or the cells which are undergoing metastasis, they don't show cell to cell adhesion. Okay, so that they can move from one place to the other. So what we found was that, so this gene, our gene of interest, it is localized to the plasma membrane. Now what happens? So it facilitates the cell to cell adhesion. If this gene is lost, okay, so the cell to cell adhesion is slowly becoming lost, so that the cells can move in any direction. You are getting my point? Okay, so that's what we showed with this slide. Then we did lot of cell cycle kind of analysis. So I don't want to go into the details of that. So and what we identified is that, so this gene also inhibits the cell cycle progression. So which is also shown here. And then it also inhibits the migration. So migration means the cancer cells, when compared with the normal cells, they can go from one place to the other. Okay, so they move very fast from one place to the other. Okay, loss of cell adhesion, then movement, that is also property of the metastatic cancer. So what we showed here is that upon overexpressing our gene, the cells doesn't migrate. So how to interpret this data? So we use cell culture. Okay, we make a scratch. Now if this wound area, okay, and we observe the same area under the microscope for different time points. Now, if this wound closes faster, okay, it takes its own time to close, okay, because cells will migrate. Now, when it migrates, okay, for example, if you have two groups, here you have a without gene and with gene. So now, if you see here, the wound close happens faster when compared with this, okay, wound doesn't close that faster, and then we count how much area it is still empty, and that's the way we represent this data. Okay, you can see here, that's the way we interpret this data. So you have a control group, you have a test group, how fast the wound get closed. Since we are working on a tumor suppressor gene, so it delays the wound healing, means it shows that wound closure doesn't happen, it takes lot of time for the this one. So indirectly it tells that it inhibits the cancer cell migration. Okay. And then what we did is we did in a mice experiment. We took these cells, we grafted the tumor into the nude mice. Okay, nude mice are nothing but the model system which are used in cancer study. These are the immune compromised mice. They don't have an immunity. Okay, so that's why if you take any cell and if you graft, you can make them the cells can be grown. So if you take a normal mice which are not immune compromised and if you inject that mice into the cells into the mice, so it is very difficult to develop the tumor. But here it is easy. So you can see here, this is in the absence of the gene and this is in the presence of our gene. So you can see the difference in the tumor size. So you can see now this is the tumor growth. So here in the absence of the gene, tumors are very bigger, and in the absence of the presence of the gene, the tumors are very small. So this indicates that the overexpression of the gene or this gene is very important to reduce the tumors or it inhibits the tumor growth. You got the point, no? That's how we interpret the data. Then many of the times what happens is that there is a problem of metastasis. So advanced stage of cancer shows metastasis, and we were interested to see whether it shows any metastasis. And I'll tell you one important what is that interesting observation. So in the absence of this gene, okay, the liver metastasis being inhibited. It doesn't inhibited any other organ metastasis. Liver, lung, the brain. So these are the area which are the target of cancer cells. So our study showed that if you have this gene, it inhibits the cancer cell migration to the liver. Okay, and when we uh, looked into the cancer patient data, similar observation we got, saying that if the patients with this gene, okay, getting expressed, the liver metastasis is very minimal as opposed to the patients where these genes are not getting expressed. Okay, this is about the methylation. Maybe 10 minutes, 10 more minutes I will take. Okay, then I will stop. So if you see, I told at the DNA level there is an epigenetic mechanism which we call it as DNA methylation. At the level of RNA, the non-coding RNA, they also plays an important role in uh, regulating the gene expression. Okay, so based on the tumor suppressive function or tumor producing function or pro-tumorigenic function, some of the RNAs can be classified as pro-oncogenic, some of them can be classified as anti-oncogenic. Okay, so these are the distribution of RNA in our body. So we have, if you see the, you have the pseudogenes, we have the long non-coding RNA, we have the short non-coding RNA, we have the protein coding RNA. So if you take any cell, the RNA can be classified into these categories. So protein coding RNA contribute to the synthesis of the protein, while the non-coding RNA contribute to the regulatory aspect of the this protein synthesizing aspect. Okay, and we published series of papers on this one. Last year only we have published 14 papers on only on microRNA and how it can contribute to cervical cancer. So we did from the tissue, we profiled the microRNA expression so that it can be used for diagnostic and prognostic application. Now we have also identified the circulating microRNA. Circulating microRNA means, so for example, sometimes what happens is that you have to take the tissue. Taking tissue is a painful procedure. Okay, so but if you develop a non-invasive marker, for example from saliva or urine or minimally invasive like blood, so glucose test we do, right, going hospital. For diabetes we do glucose level test. For that we take the blood and then we do the profile. So we wanted to develop something like that for early diagnosis of cervical cancer. So we took normal people's blood, we took the pre-malignant people's blood, then we took the cancer patient's blood, and then we did the microRNA profiling and we identified the cancer specific microRNA signatures, and all these are being published. Okay, and this is how the signature shows. Okay, karyotype. So don't get lost with the figure. So this figure shows that many of the microRNA show upregulation, many of the microRNA show downregulation, and this can be used for the early diagnosis of the cancer. So that is what we showed. And so again same this one, the data being presented. Then this is how the methylation and expression profile of the microRNA goes. In normal, their expression is high. In the pre-malignant condition, slowly they come down, and in the tumor, still they go down. Okay, and some of the microRNAs they show reverse. Okay, so now using this from the serum, basically you can predict the risk of a person. So now we are using artificial intelligence and machine learning approach to predict the as a risk. So if these microRNAs are down regulated, so how likely a person is at a, as a threat for the cervical cancer. So that work we are doing. So with this, I would like to end my talk, okay? And I would like to thank DBT, Government of India, for funding our study. Then DST, SERV, for finding our study. Then these are the people who are associated with work. Dr. Satyamurthy was my PhD mentor, so I did my PhD under him. And these are the people who gives us the clinical samples. Without them, we cannot do this work. So Dr. Prahlad Kustagi is from KMC Mangalore. He gives us the gynecological cancer related samples. Dr. Raghu, he is our oral pathologist. He gives us oral cancer samples. Then Dr. Shorja Banerjee is also from KMC Mangalore. He gives us the therapy response related samples. These are the people who do bioinformatic work, and these are the people who does this work. I have about 15 PhD students who are working with them, and these are the one who are directly associated with this work. Okay, and she is my wife. She is also worked with this project, and we are currently patenting. And this is my contact information. So if you have any doubt or some clarification or need more information, you can write to me. Thank you. And and I'm extremely sorry. I have a severe throat infection and running nose. So I don't know whether how good I was able to convey the message. His question was whether vaccination needs to be given at a particular age or any age you can give. Generally, before the reproductive age, the vaccine or before the beginning of the sexual activity, sexual reproduction. So that age is good for protection. Okay, so the still we don't know, but based on the lot of epidemiological data in the Western country, so this is what they say.